Welcome back to the fourth video of this series where we are looking at the B2B PI to CPI migration procedure. Now, we've gone through first of like how to first get a clear overview of your scope of your migration project and say before you then start the actual migration, you need to prepare your partner profiles in your integration suite TPM. You need to prepare your mix and potentially also your max that you might want to use in these new agreements that you need to establish. And which is then the third step was to then prepare your agreement templates. So you actually say these are the definition of the templates we need to create in order to make the migration into the new integration suite TPM coming from PI. And a starting point in PI could be your B2B TPM, where in here then you would have also some agreements in place. And for this case, we were interested in Bauhaus Sweden, where we can see that we now have inbound sales orders coming in. And we can see in this case, we are actually for our companies, we have agreements in place for two different receivers, which in this case would be a Danish part of the Testos Mutual, which was the company in our PI system, our self company, and the United States as a second one. So that is sort of like what we're used to also over here, the self that you can say you can have then different partners if you want for yourself and use that. Now translate that back to integration suite. We also then know that we have like our companies. In this case, our company has changed name in the process and is now called Alora. And we have then the parent company, which is you can see the short name parent Denmark. And then we have the different subsidiaries, which is per different country that we also have this company in. So we have Austria, Germany, and the United States currently set up. Based on last time when we did the migration, actually the partner creation, based on the partner definition in PI, we then use the Figaf tool to do that. Now over here in the Figaf, we have the B2B menu. And in the B2B menu, you will see then that we can have an overview of which partner profiles is in our system. It can always be synchronized, and we can then also use multiple integration suites that we might have set up here. We can see here we have a Figaf partner, we have a CI training, and we have a test agent here set up just for doing some tests. So we're using the CI test agent, and here we can see we have these 5 partners now created. And as you can see, they can be created here using this fast track menu. That is how what we did. You can see that in video 1, where we did then create Bauhaus. Video 2, we then went in and said, okay, let's prepare and make sure that we have our mix in place. And if we have the mix we need, and we might even also have a MAC in place, which will simplify the process of creating the agreement template. And then we have the agreement template in place where we say, well, we know we're interested in an order in X12, and we can see we have them here per our different companies or subsidiaries here. And we know that this one is the parent Denmark, and that's the one we're interested in, and it's this scenario we want to migrate to. And here we can see we have the different types of transactions we can do within this process using this format or type system, as it's now called in integration suite. And there we say, well, we are operating within 2 different versions, and we're operating also with or without envelope max that we have in place. And notice also the naming. So we have this naming, and we know that this is a MAC. So that is our starting point for the migration. Now, before doing the migration, there's one thing that can be very beneficial, and that is to make sure that you go over here and you have your PI to CPI migration. You can go to your configuration first. And this is to show you also one of the newer features is that down here you will see you scroll down and you have your B2B migration settings. And here you need to enable this for the B2B option to become available. And as also a new feature, you can now specify the software components where the operation mappings that you wish to migrate that are part of the scope of your B2B migration is involved. And this is also just simply to make it easier to manage for you, because we know some PI systems, there can be many operation mappings. Maybe you're using for a ton of A to A or whatever, and it's all over the place. And just to make sure that things don't get confused up, then we say it's fine. You can migrate your A to A scenarios the way you used to, or the way it has always been done. But for B2B, it's a little bit a different animal. So that means now that when you go over to your PI to CPI overview, you will see as normal all your ICOs. So here's all your ICOs, all your receiver determinations listed. And there you can go into that and say, okay, I want to start the migration process here, for example, and get in here and say, in the migration menu, you then have everything populated and say, let's start migrating this specific ICO. And you can also over here pick an operation mapping and say, I just want to migrate an operation mapping, no fancy B2B stuff, just a simple iFlow that's doing the same mapping as it used to do. And then we have the B2B option, which then opens up a different kind of settings. Now, I just want to go back to the overview, because just to show you that here you have the option also of switching to B2B, and then immediately you will see the operation mappings that are in the software components you have configured and set up to say, okay, all of these operation mappings are potentially in scope from our B2B migration. And then we can go back and say, well, we know what we're interested in. We're interested in our Bauhaus something. And then we can see we have a Bauhaus here. And then we see we have the Bauhaus 850 version 5010, and it's going to an auto SciDoc. This is the one we want to migrate. Now, over here, you can see some things where this is agreement. Does this mean it's already migrated? Yes, it means it's already migrated, but it's to a different agent. So you see in this case, it's a different tenant than the one we're testing on. And that's again a benefit that you can say, well, you can migrate to multiple tenants if you want. If you don't want to migrate to just one and transport, then at least here you have the option of splitting it also. And that can make sense if you suddenly say, well, we have a PI landscape that we want to migrate to different tenants. There might be some reason why you're splitting this into multiple tenants. And then you can say, well, we can then assign them accordingly. But this is the one we want to migrate. Now, one thing that's interesting to look at first is saying, like, do you have any test cases? I cannot recommend this strong enough. Prepare PI test cases before you do anything. Just make sure that you say, well, we know at least what we're doing in PI and we know how to test it and we have the whole thing in place. And for this example, you can also see that once you have also migrated the operation mapping as a B2B mapping, you have the option of also migrating your test cases. And here you can see, for example, the test cases we have here. And what is interesting maybe for some is to say, as you can see here, our ICO, because often the test case is linked to an ICO, you can see that they are identical for here, where it's a generic one. We're using the EDI separator and a generic interface and a generic communication channel, EDI separator channel, and so on. So everything is generic in PI, meaning that we have from tons of different partners messages going through. But as you can see again, and this is a different story that you can look at if you start looking at the test tool and see what the test tool can offer you of different functionalities here. You have an option of also creating test cases that will be, for example, partner specific, something you can extract based on the payload. So you can see here that we can actually see, okay, we have a bunch of messages coming in to the exactly same type of message, to the same ICO, but they relate to different partners. And here, somewhere here is our Bauhaus. And as you can see, um, we can then say, well, I can run it anytime I want and just make sure that this is still running and is executed successfully. And there's done. I can go in here and see, for example, my test results. And here we can see this is the one that I just ran. And I can then poll my messages and see, get all the test results back and make sure that it is then eventually updated to success. Everything is successful. This test case is working, and it shows that the system is still behaving as it did by the time we recorded the original message, which could come from some production system where you said, well, these are all recorded in production, and now when we're testing in our test system, it all works fine. But again, that's sort of the next step. The first step is then to say, well, now we also want to migrate this one. and you click here the button and you get into the menu here of the B2B migration. Now what you see here is the migration to the other tenant here, where then we can say, well, let's do the training tenant, and then it will be empty because now this is unfamiliar. In a different video, we will touch on the use of generic mappings, which is something you can set up if you say, well, I have a mapping I'm using for 50 different partners, so I just want to migrate that once and reuse it for those 50 partners. I will address that functionality in a separate video, but it's a very similar process you have to do. You just have to do it in 2 steps instead of 1. We will in this case say, well, this is a partner specific mapping. It's only for Bauhaus relevant, and therefore we will just migrate it now once and for all into something new for our partners. And here you can see the list of partners that are in our integration suite system. And one of them is our Bauhaus Sweden, which we created as per video 1. So I select that. Now you'll see that up here, I'll skip one step, we actually have the option also of picking our company or whether it's a subsidiary. So in this case, well, we know that this Bauhaus is doing business also with the United States, but they're also doing with our parent company in Denmark. So I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to see what agreements now templates do we have. Now note also that the agreement templates you see here are the agreement templates for your company or subsidiary. So already there it's filtered down to these are the scenarios available just for your company that you have selected up here. Similar, if we pick something else like the United States, we would then get a different list. You see it here, subsidiary US. Once we find the correct scenario, we have to say here, and also here you have the option of filtering and say, I want an order, and okay, it's already there. That's the one I want. Pick that one. Once you pick that one, you also get the precise scenarios that is in this template. And here we then have our 3 scenarios, where in the last video 3 we just added this one without envelope and say, well, maybe we want to process this without envelope. Doesn't really make much sense. That was more for just show an example how you can easily create another Mac, which is a completely empty shell. And you could use it now here and migrate, and then use your migrated operation mapping to send everything through, and everything would then be handled just fine, even though you have this empty Mac. Instead, but we're going to use this one because we do want to use the envelope for now. Then you've selected this. Then we get down to the details, and you see now you have now for your partner and your company details you set up. And here is the important thing, like you then decide what is our type system, which used to be our formats, right? What format are we using in the company? We're using iDocs. Note, I skipped a little bit the system. Here we also select the system. Now you have here an option of selecting what systems is available for this partner. So there you can quickly say, okay, here you see, for example, for our trading partner, we have the development, the test, and the production. But by default, we will always pick the development system and say that's the development system that you first want to create an agreement for. Type system we see for Bauhaus, we selected when we created it. We said we only want to deal with X12. You can easily add more, but for now it's just this one. Similar, there could be multiple versions to pick from, but we just had the one we selected in the beginning when creating the partner using the Figaf fast track. Similar over here, we say, well, this is going to be upgraded to HANA, so that's what we deal with. And then you start going with the identifiers. And here, as you might notice, you get the benefit of, first of all, you only get the identifiers that relate to the type system. So when you've selected up here at iDoc, you only get the identifiers related to the iDoc type system. And you can then see what it is. Okay, this is iDoc for Aloha Group Denmark. We pick that one. And then similar, it says like, yeah, for this same company, what is it in the partners type system? So this is an X12. And similar, you can see Aloha Solution Group Denmark. We have then we in this case have the DUNS number as an option. And we say, okay, that's the one we're going to pick. Communication, it's an iDoc receiver. For the trading partner, we then say, okay, what's the identifier in the trading partner system, in their own system? And then you see suddenly here, now we have the whole list. And again, if you only saw these values, maybe some of you know them and recognize and say, I think that's a DUNS number. But you see over here, again, with the alias, you get a clear indication. And these are the aliases created with, again, the Figaf fast track for creating partners. You get these out of the box and they all follow the same naming convention. I know it says like, why does it say Sweden, Sweden? Because here you get the partner name plus the country. So if you, for example, say, well, I'm only dealing with um, Apple or something, and they say, well, and then I just call my partner Apple, and then it's in the United States, then it would be Apple United States. But in this case, it's Bauhaus Sweden in Sweden. Anyways, you pick here and say, well, they're going to use the GLN code, and in the receiver system, they're going to be the Bauhaus. And the communication is that then they going to send a process direct. Now, these identifiers should, of course, match the agreement we had over here with our partner initially for Denmark. So we say here for Denmark, we say Bauhaus is dealing with the GLN code. Our receiver company is using the DUNS identifier, which then also we say in our here migration, that is exactly the ones we used here, Bauhaus GLN, and our Aloha Solution Group Denmark DUNS. So again, we picked the right ones, and we basically said, well, that's what we want to migrate. Everything has now been defined. We run a check. Now, with all the migration, what we built in here is there is a mandatory check function. Whenever you change anything, it first does the check. So simply to avoid too many errors where, oops, you forgot something, you missed something, this is blank or not blank, or you suddenly change to something that's not correct or matching, you always run a check, and it will then say, I've done the check, we're ready to go. Now we get to a little more complicated, and this is a manual process. You then have to say, okay, all of these technical objects are somehow used. You can see that there is a lot of functional libraries here that are used in this mapping. And then we have some core basic stuff like the IDOC and the X12 message type in itself. And then we have the mapping up here to begin with. So we have a mapping, we have some schemas, and we have a bunch of scripts. Also some completely custom scripts that we are using, our own Figaf basic scripts. Now, our guideline would say, first of all, create your mapping as a local object when you're migrating to a partner-specific mapping here. Reuse your schemas. For all the SAP standard libraries, we would say don't start reusing or picking whatever you might have somewhere in your system. Do a complete, fully migrated function library you can say process first, where you migrate your standard SAP libraries into a not software component, into a package that you have in your integration suite. So in your integration suite, you will have a package dedicated to just using standard scripts that have been migrated using standard SAP functionality. That way, you are not relying on something that's done by somebody manually or more or less or little um, specific to whatever user have been or developer has been doing what. So I will pick these mapping, and they're easy to spot because we have the software component here, and we can see that these are um, the libraries for our standard standard function libraries here in CPI. And yeah, you can be able to find these also in the integration suite, of course, where they've just been migrated like you normally would. So that's basically what I said. That is how we want to do it. Can I migrate? No, because first I have to check. First, of course, I have to check, does this still make sense? It does. We are ready. It's ready to go. And then you have the preview option, but we just go directly to migrate. Migration process completed. Thank you. We look at that, and then we go back to our overview. Let me remove this filter, but we can just see again, we have all of our operation mappings ready, but now we can see that we have for Bauhaus two of them here. We have one for our one tenant where we used a different naming convention, and then we have up here, we can see we've already done a migration for Apple Sweden, and we have one for Bauhaus Sweden as well in place. Notice the name also, we have the scenario name and then a bunch of details that can be added out here with all the details about this. What is the iFlow used? What is the company, partner? All these different details are added and visible right here. So that gives us an overview. We know what's going on, and we can also go directly to the agreement and we can open it in tracked objects so we can see what's happening in our own system. And this can be very useful for transport at some point. But let's start by opening just in directly in CPI. So here is our newly created agreement. We can go in and review it and see if we agree with whatever is set up. But what's interesting here is that you will see that this is not using the MAC like we started with, which was the definition of this. Instead, we have said we are doing a custom iFlow configuration using process direct address, and you can see also the process direct is already maintained. Note also that the transaction has the same name as it originally had, except where before it said MAC, now we're saying custom iFlow like you would have in here, where you select and you say, do you want to use a customized mapping processing, custom integration flow? Yes. And then that's why this has been changed to name. But I basically don't have to do anything over here. I can just say, let's activate this thing. It starts the processing, 40, 90, and active. So this is active. We go back here. Now, there was also a iFlow here. Let's open that as well. Not in Figaf, but instead in the integration suite. Now, actually, the better way to go to this is to go back to the B2B menu. If you go then from here, from now you said I've migrated and that is in place. Now I'd like to go back to my B2B menu, and here you can go look at your scenarios. Now, if you look at your scenarios, we will see now here that we have, and let me start by filtering by partner, and then we say here, I'm going to deal with Bauhaus. Then we have Bauhaus here. You can see now the agreement name or our transaction name, scenario name. We have the template, we have the agreement itself, the partner, but then there's lacking a lot of information, but we can also see over here that this is a custom one because we are not using a Mac, but instead we are using a main flow, customized main flow. Just to show you for the same reference, that if you go here, look at all these agreements that are in place, some of them, then you will see that most of them here are using Macs, have been defined, and here's the Mac used. And as soon as this is blank, you can see it's because it has a custom flow instead. Now, if I go to this main flow, and this is where I wanted to go into the integration suite, you can see here is our mapping. This I'll just deploy and say, you know what, I migrated it, I'm fine. And for your reference, you can see here now that a flow has been created. Again, you can see following our naming convention, basically specifying here our agreement template, adding then our partner short name that we had, again following this naming convention, and adding dot main flow. So all of this is all handled by Figaf when we do the migration, creating all of this and also placing it into a package with similar name If we take the B2B, you see here now we have a package name which is similar to our template. So template and packages are now one-to-one. And in here, then you would have whatever you have migrated. And in this case, you can see two have been migrated. It's Bauhaus Sweden and it's Apple Sweden has been migrated. But now this has been deployed. And what we can do in Figaf here is that we can then say, let's just do a synchronization. Synchronization finished. Okay. And now you can see we get the details down here where we also say what is the different standards used, what are the identifiers used, what's the partner, what's the version, message version, and so on, and everything there is ready. Now, to show you then, if we go back to the migration, again here we said, well, we have just migrated this one over here. Let's check here, we have it for the right client. And now we say for this scenario, I'm interested in migrating my test cases now. Then it says, which one are you interested in? Well, we know that we say this Bauhaus here is the one that we now like to migrate to CPI. Then it says we can create a new or you can add it to an existing. I'll just have an existing here with B2B orders CPI. And then down here, you can either say, do you want to link it to a specific flow chain or a B2B scenario? And this is where it's interesting to say, yes, I want to match it with a B2B scenario. And now you can see our list of B2B scenarios. You can sort by them and we say, well, I am interested in something where the center is Bauhaus. And we say that, well, there is one. Is this the one? Yes, that is my scenario, my B2B scenario that I'm interested in. So I select that and I save my migration of my test case. So now you can see here, we have our suite where you see there's some stuff here left over from a different tenant, but up here we have for our Figaf, we have our Apple test cases, and now we have a new one for B2B for Bauhaus Sweden. Just to show you that there's many ways you can get here, because basically you say now this is ready to test. But to go back to our B2B, if you go over to our B2B menu and also look at the scenarios, again we can look at the Bauhaus. I'll say I'm just interested in Bauhaus. I can see that. And if you scroll out, and of course this you can change this menu any way you want. You can move these around and say where do you want this. But then you can see you have your test cases. And you click on it and it goes directly to the test case we have just migrated. And say this test case, I want to run that. And we then have one running. I'm polling for messages. And I got my messages back. Which basically means that you can also go over here and look at your B2B scenarios. And what you'll find over here is your two Bauhaus messages to a lower group, just like Apple Sweden was done earlier. So these messages are just processed right now at the same time, and we have the messages going through and we have an IDOC generated. What was the result? I already got that. I need to go check at my results. Error. The test failed. Why did it fail? Well, everything got processed, but you see, this is what's interesting. There's, of course, some fields that are a little bit differently populated. My IDOC number, there's something, a test indicator, because it knows the test system. You got to remember, again, this envelope is populated now by TPM. It's not doing the same mapping. It's doing some of the mapping that you already did, but now it's doing additional mapping of additional fields, however, incorporate as much extra details and bonus that you can get from TPM. So you see all of this information, but then what's more interesting, of course, you see receiver partner and sender partner is 3 ads. This is something we have incorporated to say when you are doing some kind of special lookup in TPM or in a lookup in the whatever it kind of lookup you might doing some lookup table or whatever, we're saying like that's not possible anymore, and then we're adding this instead, and this is now the gap you have to close and start fixing. But in overall, your migration has been, your B2B scenario has been migrated. It's operational. You can run exactly the same test case as you did in PI. And if we do look at the differences here, that's basically it. Everything else is exactly the same. Your IDOC has exactly the same output as it did